This is an incident that happened to me in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, Washington state area, long ago, in the 1960s. As a young teenager, I was very impressionable. My parents were never active in my life, and I always wanted to feel like I belonged to a group. It didn't matter who gave me the attention, just as long as I got it from somebody. Feeling neglected, I ended up running away from home at the age of 19 so I could join a satanic cult. The cult was pretty serious. We would often meet up at this secluded building in the middle of the woods that was abandoned at night to gather around in circles, drawing pentagrams and praying to evil. We did a lot of drugs and even sacrificed animals as part of our ritual. We would decapitate squirrels and place them inside the pentagram, and other times we would cut ourselves and write our names on the walls with our blood. It was definitely not a good environment for me, to say the least, but at the time, I was thinking of how much of a bond we all had together, the 5 of us. The building itself actually felt very haunted, but because I was so stoned out of my mind, I wasn't sure if it was hallucinations or legitimate spirit haunting this old building. I remember one night, we were injecting each other with needles, and we ended up passing out for a few hours. As I started to regain consciousness, everyone else was completely out, and I swear I saw the presence of an old man in a brown cloak, hood on, and with white eyes that glowed in the darkness of this building. He was there for about 30 seconds, then vanished. He was watching me from the stairs inside the building. We were all in the living room at the time, and there from the living room, you can see the stairs in front of you. The people I was with would sometimes hear voices, evil whispers and laughter so subtle, but quiet enough to hear. I vividly remember another night where we held our bloodied hands together after sacrificing a deer. I could have sworn after 3 minutes of chanting the devil as our leader, we heard the door from the upstairs of the building open and slam twice. We kept going, and I remember one of us blurted out, "If the devil is here, please show yourself." Nothing happened, and we ended up doing drugs again and passed out. The next time, all 4 of us were awakened to one of the cult members convulsing and choking. I was very alarmed by this, panicked, and told the rest of them that we needed help. All of them angrily told me no, leave him be. I yelled at them to help him, that he needed medical help and he would die. And 2 of the cult members proceeded to tackle me and pin me down to the ground to prevent me from doing so. They told me that this is what our Lord wanted to happen, that this was natural, and if he loses his life, the devil will want a new companion. What happened next is something that will always haunt me. I watched this guy die in front of my face, and not one single person gave a crap, except me. They kept trying to tell me that it was natural, that this was supposed to happen. The next thing I knew, the 3 of them were tying me up to keep me from escaping. They told me that I wasn't a worthy member of this cult, and because of my reaction, they couldn't trust me. I told them that I was definitely worthy, that I wouldn't tell a soul, but it was like my words were being ignored. One of the members turns to the other and tells them, "We'll keep him here for the entire night and figure out what to do with him in the morning." So, they ended up tying me up and leaving me alone for the rest of the night at this old abandoned building that looked like an asylum. They had left for the night. They ended up drugging me and I passed out until I ended up awakening. As I awoke, I was still reeling from the shock of everything that happened. I actually gagged a couple of times. They didn't even move the body. I was tied up in the hallway, and I was forced to look across at the body that was still there. The man's eyes were bulging open, wide, and lifeless. Now here's where the paranormal part kicks in. After a few minutes of being awake, I look across to where the body was, and I could see a group of hooded figures in a circle around the body, cloaked apparitions. I blinked a few times, and they were gone. Was I hallucinating from the drugs? I'm not sure, but it gave me yet another thing to be afraid of. Anyway, not long after that, and I don't even know how this happened, but as I was trying to free myself from the rope that had my hands tied up against the banister of the stairs, I managed to somehow free myself. But that's when I heard voices getting closer to the building. It was the rest of the cult, and they were coming back. At this point, the sun was starting to rise, but it was still dark, so I did my best to flee, and I left out the window in the main room and ended up running through the woods. I just bolted and ran as fast as I could. I never ran so fast before in my life. It must have been from the adrenaline. Eventually, I was able to pass through the woods until I ended up on the main road, when I saw an auto dealership. I ran into the dealership, told the workers to call the cops, that I was abducted, and that there was a group of terrible people who let a man die at the abandoned building a few miles into the woods. They called the cops, and they eventually ran out to the building. The body was still there, and the group was arrested. They ended up going to jail for 15 years. The building itself was torn down not too long after, and I've never actually been back to the spot. I don't know why I would anyway. I ended up having PTSD for years after this incident, terrible trust issues, but after years of therapy, I ended up rehabilitating myself. This happened in the 1960s. I guess the reason why I wanted to write this story was to warn you that you should never be desperate enough to join a group of people who do terrible things. Never openly trust people without evidence that they are worth it. And of course, never join a satanic worshipping cult. I made my mistake and almost paid for it with my life. Nowadays, I have 2 kids, and I tell them this story to remind them that there are bad people out there, but also that there are spirits that can be summoned, and they can be very evil. Stay away from all of that. It's not a good lifestyle. What I'm about to tell you happened during the summer of 2015. The incident was at a Mayan jungle, 2 hours away from Cancun, Mexico. My friend John was moving for work and decided to drive 1,000 miles from his home in Mexico City to Cancun. To an adventurous girl like me, it rang in my ears as a fascinating road trip. I offered to go with him, as he'd be going through some of Mexico's most dynamic and breathtaking sights. In Cancun, with its beautiful coastline, covered in powdery white sand and deep turquoise blue waters, was not only worth the 1,000-mile drive, but would be the perfect destination to complete my vacation before flying back home to California. Cancun is situated in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico's southeast. The peninsula is a region covered in deep rainforest and jungles where the Mayans once erected their great empire. The first leg of the trip was as expected. Great sights, great food, great places, great music, great people. However, the rain and terrain soon started changing as we started going deeper into the jungle. Roads were less illuminated, towns and villages scarier. We had enjoyed the road so much. The next leg of the trip was going to be non-stop all the way to Cancun. The night hit us as we drove through one of the deepest parts of the jungle. The road started narrowing until it became a 2-lane road, with the only light coming from the full moon ahead of us, and the dim headlights from the mid-90s hatchback John was driving. He estimated we would be in Cancun in about 2 hours. It was 2 a.m., and the moonlight could let you appreciate the thick vegetation on each side of the road. John was telling me some more folklore about the region and legends about the Mayans that once lived in the region, when suddenly the car started slowing down. John would press on the gas, but the car would struggle to go. Shortly, the oil indicator lit up. Something was wrong, but to our relief, we saw lights up ahead and what seemed to be toll booths. We decided we would park by the booths and call roadside assistance. Our relief was short-lived when we realized the toll booths were under construction and they weren't functioning. There was nobody on duty, so we decided to keep going, but about 25 yards past the booths, the car completely stalled. Luckily, the road was well illuminated from the booth sign, and the car stalled right next to a light pole. John gets out of the car to see what was going on. It was leaking a lot of oil. He calls roadside assistance to no avail due to bad signal. He decides to try to fix the car. He goes to the trunk, gets some tools and a bottle of oil, and gets to work. After many attempts, the car wouldn't start, so John decides to call roadside assistance and finally gets through. Unfortunately, they tell him it would take 3 hours to reach us. I told John we are less than 2 hours from Cancun. Isn't there anything they can do? He put his tools away and gets back in the car and tells me there's nothing we can do but wait, to get some sleep and wait for roadside assistance. He then reclines his seat and goes to sleep. I get out of the car instead and start looking at the road, the vegetation, admire nature. A few minutes went by. Something caught the corner of my eye. I look back at the booths, and I can see the silhouette of a man peeking from one of them. I call John, but he doesn't respond. I look at him, and he is fast asleep. I look back at the booths, and the man leaped from one booth to the other. I yell at John that there is a man at the booths. He wakes up and tells me not to talk nonsense. At this point, the man leaped from the last booth and stood in the middle of the road, dressed in a khaki long-sleeve shirt and khaki pants. Pretty normal, but there was something weird about him. His stance was abnormal, arms wide open, lowered with hands open, and that, when I felt a cold shiver down my spine, when I noticed his arms and fingers were too long for his body. I insist on John, and he decides to get out of the car and sees the man standing back there. He looks at me, then at the man again, and yells at him, "Hey." The man shook his shoulders, put his arms forward like a sleepwalker would, and started walking towards us slowly. John and I looked at each other in disbelief and asked me what's up with this dude. We turned back to the man, and he was now about 10 yards away. I could really see him now. He was of heavy build, about 6 feet tall, short black hair, light brown skin, but I couldn't see his face. It was like an empty space. As he drew closer, we saw in horror that he had no face, just flat plain skin with no nose, no eyes, no forehead, nothing. At about 5 yards, he stopped with his arms still forward like a zombie. He had long arms and bony hands with long fingers. The area was well illuminated that we could see him clearly, that there was no mask, and we were no doubt in front of something paranormal or otherworldly. The faceless man tilted his head side to side, and that's when panic set in. I rushed into the car and told John to get in and let's go. He was in shock and took all my screaming to get him back. He rushes close to the hood of the car, and I can see the faceless man walking towards us again. John was getting back in the car when I noticed the oil lamp on the car's hood and yelled at him to put it on. He pops the hood of the car and puts it on. The faceless man had taken 2 long steps and was now 5 feet from when John was rushing back in the car. He turned the engine, to no avail. I could see the torso of the faceless man through the driver's side rear window. I was totally panicking. Then the car finally started, and we took off as fast as the car could. We look ahead at the road, and we hear what sounded like a hit on the rear bumper. I screamed at John that he is probably hanging off the bumper. John, short of breath, tells me he doesn't think so, as he would feel the weight in the car, and that I might have to get back to the back seat to check. I was about to, when I looked back and see the faceless man standing back there in the middle of the road, fading with the distance as we speed away. In a couple very long hours of shock and silence, we reached Cancun city limits. We stopped at the gas station to collect ourselves. He had no face. John would repeat this over and over for a while. When we were calm and rested enough to keep going, John turns the car engine and the car does not turn on. We look at each other with horror, but then remembered we were safe away from the scene, and we smiled, slightly in relief. I want to express that we did not see Slender Man. That's an internet creepypasta. The body of the man was like a normal heavy-built guy, just long arms with bony hands. He even had hair. This experience changed my view about risks and scary parts of being an adventurer, but I will continue to have adventures in the deserts, forests, and jungles of the world. I just hope I don't ever run into the faceless man again.
I was reading through several stories today on your website, and one in particular sparked a memory of an experience I had when I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter. I may not have shared this story with you once before, but I don't remember. I remember that night just like it was yesterday. One evening in early 1994, my husband and I were watching TV on the couch when I decided to go to bed. I blew out a candle I had burning on the kitchen table and then headed to the bedroom. It wasn't too long after I crawled into bed that I was abruptly taken over by this unseen force sitting on my belly. My daughter began to move very violently and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I looked out my bedroom door and could see this flickering light coming from the living room. I figured my husband fell asleep on the couch and forgot to turn off the halogen floor lamp we had sitting behind it. I began to scream as loud as I could for him, but nothing came out of my mouth. The harder I tried to scream for help, the harder the unseen force seemed to push down on me. I began to pray. I prayed like crazy, asking Jesus to protect me and my unborn child. I kept looking out the bedroom door, seeing that flickering light, and hoping to see my husband come running in, but he never came. The whole incident lasted for what seemed like forever. But when it was over, just like that. There was no more pain. I could breathe, and my daughter was at peace. That's not the end of the story, though. I got up from the bed and headed to the living room to tell my husband what had happened. No sooner than I left the bedroom, of course, I found him sleeping soundly on the couch. But the halogen light behind it wasn't on. The flickering light I kept seeing throughout the ordeal was the candle on the kitchen table. As I explained in the beginning, I blew this candle out before I went to bed. And I know I did, because I have always been very cautious about burning candles. The candle had somehow rekindled itself and burned all the way down to the wick. Apparently, the glass votive had gotten so hot that it broke and sent flames from the wick onto the table and placemats. The entire top of the table was on fire, placemats and all. I started screaming at my husband to wake up. He jumped off the couch to find me trying to smother the flames out with a kitchen towel. The apartment started to quickly fill up with black smoke. He grabbed the fire extinguisher and put the fire out. After it was all said and done, we talked about what had just happened, trying to make some sense of it all. I was certain the unseen force was trying to kill me and my baby. I thought it was holding me down so that when the fire spread through the apartment, I would die from smoke inhalation, or worse, burn to death. My husband thought that whatever it was trying to warn me, that it was trying to wake me up so that I would discover the fire. But I swear I was not asleep. At some point, I thought maybe it was all just a bad dream. But then it dawned on me. If it was just a dream, how was I able to see the flickering lights coming from the living room, which turned to be flames? What I do know is, had I not gotten up when I did, it wouldn't have been long before the whole apartment would have been filled with smoke and fire, and we all would have perished. Guardian angel or evil spirit? I guess I will never know. These particular experiences occurred when I was around 8 or 9 years old, and it happened to be my first encounter with the paranormal. I grew up in a very religious household, and my parents were strict disciplinarians. Unfortunately, I was subjected to a lot of physical abuse at the hand of my stepmother. My biological mother died when I was only 3 months old, and my father remarried a little while after. She was an absolute witch to me. And to this day, I don't know why my dad even found her to be remotely compatible. She would call me a filthy animal because I wasn't praying enough at times. The first experience I had with the paranormal was also toward the end of my dad's relationship with this woman. I can remember a moment I was crying because my dad had been working construction all night and didn't come home until late night. I'll never forget how she spat in my face, told me that real ladies don't cry about daddy working late nights. I told her specifically that I really wanted daddy, and she told me if I didn't calm down, she was going to throw me into the pantry closet and lock the door, which was this huge empty space that could fit 2 adult-sized humans in. Naturally, as an 8-year-old kid, I revolted. She kept her word and threw me in there for an hour. This is where something creepily paranormal happened. After about 20 minutes in, I could hear a faint whispering of a female lady in my ear. I couldn't make it out, but I'll never forget what it sounded like. It was very soothing, and I felt very comforted. I then felt a breath on the back of my neck, and 2 cold hands touched my shoulder. The pantry closet got a lot cooler all of a sudden, and in my mind, all I was thinking about was the sound I heard from this voice. I ended up curling up on the floor of the pantry and started drifting off to sleep. As my eyes began to feel heavy, I squinted with limited visibility. I turned my head to the opposite side of the dark pantry, when I saw a pair of glowing green eyes in the mouth of someone. The crazy thing was, whatever this thing was, it had razor-sharp teeth, as if they were fangs. I could only see their eyes, and it almost looked like it was slowly opening its mouth, as if it were going to devour me whole. I closed my eyes completely for a few seconds, opened them up again, and it was gone. I'm not sure what the second presence was, but it didn't seem very friendly at all. As for the female voice and the touching, I truly believe that it was my biological mother comforting me through tough times. Well, anyway, I remember I ended up staying in the closet for longer than I was supposed to, and when my dad came home, he had a talk with my stepmother. Thankfully, my dad saw through her lies, and he broke up with her not too long after this incident happened. From that day on, the pantry closet had a reputation for creepy, ghostly activity. The door would randomly open slowly and shut at times. If there were items on the shelves, such as cans, they would sometimes fall on the ground. My dad told me one of the scariest things happened to him after he got home from work. It was another late night working. My sister, my brother, and my grandmother were all asleep at the time. My grandma had moved in shortly after my dad broke up with my stepmother to help take care of us. Right across from the pantry closet was the kitchen. My dad comes home and he ends up going into the kitchen to decompress for a moment after a hard day's work. Right then, the pantry closet opened slowly, and that's when he saw something. He swears to this day that thing he saw looked 100% real, and he was not hallucinating. Standing in the pantry was a faceless man in a red tuxedo with horns on his head. My dad froze with fear, blinked his eyes twice, and the figure was gone. Later that night, he actually fell asleep and had a dream that he went to hell and saw his ex, former stepmother. The creepy thing is, the faceless man that he saw in the pantry was holding hands with my stepmom. My stepmom had cuts all over her face. I remember he woke up screaming and never saw the figure ever again in the pantry or had a dream about my stepmother either. Another experience. My stepmother, sister, brother, grandma, and I all slept in one room, different beds of course. It was a normal night, and I just fell asleep as usual, hours later. I woke up for no reason and saw a person sitting in my grandmother's bed. I thought it was just my grandma praying since she would always pray, but then I started to realize that my grandma was sleeping, and this person looked a bit younger. I just stared at whatever that thing was and noticed it was looking right back at me. This wasn't my mom because it looked like an entirely different woman. I've seen pictures of my mom and she was a ginger and had beautiful thick long hair. This figure I saw was bald-headed and looked very distraught. After she looked at me, she looked back at her hands and covered them with her face. I know for a fact that it was a woman because she had feminine features in her face. You could see it clearly in the body of a woman. Not only was she bald-headed, but her face was burned and disfigured. All I did was stare at her. Then, after all that, she suddenly got up, turned away from me, and disappeared. Eventually, I fell asleep again. I woke up the next morning and asked everybody if they were in the room last night. Then I asked my grandma if she had been praying that night. Everybody, including my grandma, said no. That was the first time I ever saw that lady, but from that day on, almost all my relatives that lived in that house have seen the very same woman I have. Only difference, they have been scared. Me, on the other hand, though I was slightly afraid, I had a curiosity about this whole experience.
Hey Phantom, so first of all, I wanted to thank you once again for tuning into yet another video of Phantom of Darkness's Haunted Ghost Stories. I really appreciate your viewership, and I really appreciate the fact that I can never talk right. Anyway guys, seriously, go ahead and share this video. Let me know in the comment section below which stories you like the most, and really just have a conversation with me in the comment section below and let me know. Sharing the videos always makes a difference, and no matter who you always are able to actually get this video out to people who are really excited about the ghost stories and share a passion with us so that we can all share this together. Yeah, I said share too much in that sentence, but just ignore that part. Anyway, give this video a like, and life will be smooth sailing from here on out. Uh, no, guys, but seriously, thanks to my pal, Dismal Hero, for helping me out on these Tails again. I figured why not do another collab? The other collab works so well with us, and I figured why not another chance to feature more people on this channel. And sooner or later, I'm going to actually be featuring more people on this channel again. So stay tuned, guys. Love you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.